Jeanette Rotella on November 7th, 1999, and this is for the oral history project of the Westville Historical Society. Jeanette is going to begin our interview with an article that she wrote for This is the Westville section of the Westville Leader. It was printed on June 4th, 1992. You can start, Jeanette.
Thank you, Paula. I'd like to read this article that I had written. It gives you an example and some facts about the Italian-American community prior to World War II. I'll begin by reading. I'm going to start again. Fig trees laden with sweet, ripe fruit, and the wonderful smells of fresh-baked Italian bread, the aroma of Mama's pasta sauce, and all the sounds of a small concertina playing O Solo Mio. All these you would find in my old neighborhood. Of which neighborhood do I speak? Not in Naples, nor New York City, but right here in Westville, and not so many years ago. That neighborhood, a triangle, was loosely bounded by Central and South Avenues and Grove Street. Though it was not the only section of town Italians settled into, it was by far the largest. There was a smaller conclave on Spring Street, which is now Watterson Place. It spilled over onto Roway Avenue and on and over to West Broad and Downer Street. Although I speak of my own neighborhood, both areas and the Italians who settled in them had everything in common. My neighborhood was contained by forced boundaries, as well as the comfortable feeling we had living among our own. You might say we were a town within our town. Everything we needed, we provided for ourselves. You need never leave the area except for employment and schooling. There was a variety of shops to serve our every need. A barber, shoe repair, butcher, bakery, confectionery, and many grocery stores. If you needed new material to sew or new clothing, we had a dry goods shop. All our needs for painting, plumbing, etc. were handily obtained at the local hardware. At birth, we had our own midwives, and if you needed a bone set, many a boy did, one of the men with some training and lots of experience did that too. Very early on, we had our own pharmacy. And when the Westfield Softball League formed in 1920, we fielded our own team. They took their name from the hub of our neighborhood, North Street, which is now known as Casciola Place. They called themselves the North Stars and participated in that league well into the 1940s. The first Italians began arriving in Westville in 1890, and by 1920 there were more than 90 families settled in town. The men came first, seeking employment and a better place to live. These men had first settled in New York City and found the noise, overpopulation, and the filth so unlike the small villages they had left in Italy. Upon their first sight of Westville, so pastoral, quiet, and oh so green, they knew they had found a new home. A church organ manufacturing company in Garwood hired every Italian carpenter they could find. These craftsmen were master cabinet and fine furniture makers. Other factories in Garwood were eager to hire the new hard-working immigrants. Other men found work as masons, gardeners, and laborers. Westville was in a construction boom, and these men, especially the masons, were sought after. Much of Westville's beautiful home gardens and landscaping originally were planted by Italians. As soon as the men found employment, they sent for their large families. From grandparents to grandchildren they arrived. The new immigrants at last had found a place to work hard, buy homes, and raise their family. And most of all, they felt a permanency in their lives. When I reminisce and gather information about the old neighborhood, I think of the seasons, each season painting a vivid picture in my mind. Primavera, spring. The first green was a time when Italians could once again take to the outdoors as they did in their sunny Italy. At the very first signs of spring, men began to scrape and paint the winter's damage, and women began the spring cleaning. I love to look at the bright windows with their newly starched curtains and their beautiful lace-trimmed ones done by hand crochet. Spring also was the time to start cleaning the backyard and to begin to turn over the soil for summer's garden. If there was a large backyard, it became a large garden. If there was only a patch, it too became a garden. There was very little we did not raise or grow for food. Spring, too, for many families meant a little extra income. My father was a monument dealer, a stone cutter. I'll always remember his working so hard to make the Memorial Day deadline. When the golf courses opened, many men and grown boys took extra jobs as caddies. For my family and others, this money meant that we could afford some extras and maybe a new spring hat. Cherry blossoms also bloomed in full color on North Street, bringing some beauty to the old worn buildings. By summertime, the cherry trees were lush with fruit, as were our gardens. The gardens gave us fresh beans, zucchini, peppers, tomatoes, and many kinds of leafy green vegetables. We Italians ate very well until we acquired the American habit of eating too much meat. Summer was a great time to be a kid. Many a day I spent in the Minnewacan wading pond. To me, they seemed as big as any Olympic-sized pool. And if you were an observant kid, all you had to do was sit on your front porch and watch the neighborhood characters go by. The men going and coming to their social clubs and the women taking their evening stroll. Any evening you could observe the Romeo, the Atlas, the slick-haired gambler, and of course the good-looking boy next door. Then you would find the Santa Maria, the busy gossip, so anxious to chat with anyone. And then there were one or two ladies that seemed to me not to be that attractive, but somehow as they passed by, they caught the attention of every man. During summer weekends, there was always an outdoor party celebrating a baptism or communion, or just any reason to get together in the warmth of summer and each other's company. Kick the can and hopscotch were the games children played. No toys were needed. We made a social club. They played bocce and a card game called Briscola. Another game the men played, I'll call Five Fingers. Simply, two men on opposite teams would throw out quickly any number of fingers on one hand. The man who called the correct total won. These games sometimes played well into the night, and watching them was as much fun as playing. Summer's end was my favorite time of the year. The children went back to school, and Mama was busy canning and preserving. My father could hardly wait for his best hobby, winemaking. Winemaking time was soon to be here. Each fall, on a special Saturday, early in the pre-dawn hours, the men and boys would go over to the South Side Railroad siding. That siding was about 600 feet from Central Avenue on the eastbound track side. As far back as 1900 and well into the 1930s, a railroad car was detached full to the brim with grapes. The men arrived early to see what the grape broker had to offer in price and quality. Each man seemed to huddle with the broker until a price was set. Every man felt he had made the best deal and would never divulge the price. No doubt they all paid the same. Later on, grapes were brought to Westville by truckloads. The grapes were quickly taken home to the already washed, rewashed, and washed again barrels and equipment. Each house had a part of the basement painted white and kept immaculately clean. The men did not make wine. They caressed the grapes. They hovered over them as though they were their babies. I still remember the sweet, sour smell so strong in our neighborhood at the time. On the day the grapes were brought home, the women were preparing a sumptuous meal. For Italians, thought that that day was a holiday. I can tell you this, the hearty Italian meals of winter were made even better, for we drank our own vintage. Winter was a time for our clubs and social societies. First, there was the Santa Lucia, founded in 1890s. Then at the time of World War I, there was the new Christopher Columbus Society. These two groups put on plays, arranged for annual feasts and fireworks. The last fireworks in Westville were in the 1940s. When these clubs ended, the new the new American-born adults formed their own club. It was called the Civic Club. The Civic Club put on plays, had a winter ball, and promoted the ideals of scholarship and community service. One of the plays that was produced was Antilles Goes to Town. It was held at the Masonic Temple. It took place in Antilles' home near a smart summer resort. I could go on and on about my own neighborhood, but space forces me to end this article. Many times I looked, there were many stumbling blocks put in our path. We jumped over every one. Maybe we took a little longer, in quotations, arriving as real Westfielders, but we did. Too, I think, how different we must have appeared to the old-timers. We Italians, with our singing language, most of us dark-haired, and certainly with a gusto for life. We loved, laughed, and even in death, our emotions were out and up front. I can understand the conservative old-timers feeling intimidated by us, but had they tried to know and understand us, they would have known we had one thing in common, our love for Westfield. Thank you, Mama and Papa. Westfield Amici, and for all Westfielders, I hope I have described a part of Westfield you have never known existed.
That was very nice, Jeanette. I can also makes me reminisce how we also in my family, being of Italian heritage, used to also produce wine in our basement with my dad.
Yeah.
My grandfather had actual grapevines in his backyard on Downer Street.
When I wrote this article and it was published in the Westfield Leader, I can't tell you how many telephone calls I got from not only young people in Westfield of Italian heritage, but out of town. How this article ever got around, I don't know. But I had calls as far away as Madison, and reminiscing about the white basement and the clean basement part that was and the barrels and the whole winemaking incident brought back so many memories for so many people.
Right. And did you make tomatoes? Did you can
tomatoes?
We did. Jarred tomatoes.
Right.
We didn't put them in cans.
Yeah, jarred tomatoes and all that. But that one part, that's the part I think brought back a lot of memories to a lot of American-born children of Italian descent.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that pretty much tells you about us.
But we'd like to have a little bit more specific about your family.
Okay.
Like you did point out some of the occasions and dates, but if you can just give us a little bit of information when your family first arrived and what brought them to Westfield.
My father arrived in the United States as a 6-year-old and went directly to Barry, Vermont to live. My father was a sculptor or a carver. He was the first and only monument dealer in Westfield up until after World War II. Well, he traveled a great deal with his family from different places that stonecutters were needed. And eventually, after having, I think there was 4 children, and my mother was pregnant with the 5th, and they were living in New York State, and my mother's brother had come to Westfield to live with his wife, and she was looking for a permanent place, no more moving around from job to job. And so my father took a ride down to Westfield to look at the town over and see if he could find a place for his little family. And he decided to get them and bring them to Westfield because he could open a business because there was no There wasn't a monument business in town.
Excuse me, so did he start his own
He
business?
started own business, well, immediately upon arriving.
It was his business, stonecutter business.
right.
Did it have a name? Was it
Yes, De Stephanus Monuments, of which I still have that business. I carry on that business.
Oh, that's very good.
And on a very small scale. But my father brought his family here, and then there were 5 more children born in Westville. And they arrived in Westville, I believe, in 1920.
And what was the address? Do you know
Okay,
the
the
address?
first address they lived at was 111 Casciola Place, which at that time was still North Street. They moved to North Street. And I believe they lived in 2 little houses there till our house was built at 514 Central Avenue. And that's where my father had his business, right there, and had the cutting, what they call a shed. It would be like a big garage in the back of the house. And in the front, he had his display of his monuments. And the front room, which was like a closed porch, was his office. And like I say, lots of people would come by and watch my father cut. Dr. Hall, who lived on Elm Street, and came, I'd say, during the summer especially. He would come a couple times a week on his way to Roe Hospital and just stop and call up his office and say, I'd be there in a little while, and sit and watch my father, especially when my father was cutting from scratch. We will call it from scratch, from a slab, and he would make the entire monument. And that was quite a few people came. That he was something to see. It was something to see. It was something that is done by machine today, and it was all done by hand.
Right, so you had the opportunity to see a
Right.
real craftsman do
Right.
something with
Absolutely,
a skill that
yeah.
originated in Europe.
Yeah, and
This-
my father also was his own blacksmith, because all his tools he had to make himself.
Really?
And to sharpen them and keep them in good condition. And we had a small little blacksmith operation within the shack, we'll call the shack that he worked out of. And he did work only summers, warm weather. Cold weather you could not work because you couldn't cut granite in cold weather.
So what did he do in the wintertime?
In the wintertime, he was off and
Made his wine.
he made his wine, made new babies, and then again, the minute the weather was warm enough, he would start. And his big business was in the spring of the year, to make the Memorial Day deadline, as I said in the article. And in the back of the cemetery of Fairview, I would say that a great many of the monuments in the back of the cemetery, the small and the large, were made by my father. And it was funny that one time when he was about a year before he died, he showed one of my brothers a spot at the very top of the hill that overlooks the back of the cemetery in the old section. And he said, if ever I died, please bury me on that hill. And that's where my father was buried.
Up on the hill.
Overlooking. Children went to Westfield schools.
Let me just
grew
ask,
up
did your
here.
brothers get involved in the business at all? Or
Yeah, they did for a while, but they gave it up because the margin of profit at that time was very small, and they did not have the artistic talent my father had. And
These monuments were only made in the warm weather, so you would request and commission one,
Right.
and it would be done in the warm
Right.
weather, or you waited until that time.
if he sold something in the winter, he had to wait till the weather got
I see.
warm enough. Today they have up in Barry, Vermont. Almost all the work is done in Barry, Vermont, and it's all done indoors that are heated, so they can cut all year long and do that all year long. But my father couldn't do that.
Well, that's. Oh, then you moved and stayed in that same area, and you all went to Westville High School.
We all went to Westfield schools.
Westfield schools.
Right. We originally all went to. Lincoln School. Now, my 2 oldest brothers and sisters went to the original Lincoln School on Temple Place, and they remember. And my sister's still alive. She remembers the day that the new Lincoln School on Westfield Avenue opened, and that she and my brother, each child was given a certain amount of books according to their age to carry over to the new school, their books. and they went over to the Lincoln School there. I think I would like to make a statement right now about that. I believe that when that school was open, when the new Lincoln School was open, and I can't prove this.
Oh, yeah.
I can't prove this, so this is... Did you want to stop it?
Yeah, just a minute. I'm going to stop.
Like I said, I can't prove this, but by looking back and talking to a lot of older people who were very active in that day, grown-ups and children, that when the new Lincoln School opened in 1920, the town fathers, Board of Education, I can't prove this now, I'll say it again and again, they saw a great many Italian American children. And I think they might have been frightened because they might have taken a quick survey of, my God, there must be hundreds of them, 100 or so of them. And I think that put the idea in their head to build a school in that same neighborhood that I said was a forced boundaries, and they built Columbus School. And all the children who lived east of Central Avenue, in that same triangle that I spoke of at the beginning, only they went to Lincoln School, the new Columbus School. And that Columbus School was 1 block away from Manor Park. Yet no one but Italian Americans went to that school, and a few blacks. So I think, and I'm only judging on what I know, that school was built to keep the Italian American children all together in one school. It's to what I call integrating right before World War II was over. And what I mean by that is that they brought in non-Italian Americans into that school right before the war ended, because I believe that the picture was very clear that when the many, many Italian American boys that went over into the service and overseas and got killed, many of them did, that they were not going to come home to a segregated school. Now that's only my opinion, and I state it. It might be wrong, but I don't think so.
Okay, well, that's something you wanted to share, and that was also a time when they were building new schools. It was a booming time, and we're not sure, but it's still an interesting position that people, when they do history and they do study different ethnic groups in our town, that's information that they can digest.
There's one thing about the Italian that came over, and the Italian American. We were the first non-English-speaking large group that came to town. Other than another group, there was a smaller German group that lived in Germantown.
Where would that be?
And the Germantown, we all knew it as Germantown at that time, I guess from the turn of the century to World War II. It was off New Providence Road. No, not New Providence. Yeah, New Providence Road. No, it's not New Providence Road. But it's on the borderline of Mountainside and Westfield. And it's where the Wahlberg Avenue is today. And Wahlberg Avenue, too, like Casciola Place, was named after 2 Army people.
Officers?
Officers. No, they just were in the Army. And World War I, both a Wahlberg and a Casciola died in the service, and they named 2 streets after them. One in the German-American community and one in the Italian-American community. So, as I said, we were the first non-speaking, and very, very, very different than the German-American. At least looked a little bit more like those that were here, but we were so different, and I can understand now why things were, people were had their thoughts about what Westfield should be and what really was. So I always felt that, and I do today, that thank God we came to Westfield, because I always say this, that my mother and father, greatest gift that they left us was not money and was not inheriting property. It was the gift of giving their children the chance to grow up in Westfield. it was the best thing that they ever did for any of us.
Well,
And I'm sure that when I speak to other Italian Americans, and I have done for years getting information together, they all say the same thing. How wonderful it was to be an Italian American in Westfield. It just gave us some...
Well, once you even people that are here for short times, they feel a real affinity to our town because it is a very caring town. It is a very nice town. But as you say, having grown up from a youngster and can see so many changes, you can really feel appreciative of it.
Right.
I wouldn't say it took courage to come here, but it was certainly a different community for the Italians to settle here, because it was primarily, you had a high Protestant people that commuted from New York, wealthy people, people that worked in the city.
It was Anglo-Saxon.
Anglo-Saxon, right.
Yeah.
But now let's go back, and if I can just say, when you talked about other families and when the actual first time when Italians actually were documented to have arrived, your family arrived in around 1920s, but you also have information.
That's 30 years after the first ones came.
Right, so that would be interesting to share.
I would like to, this I can document, because not only can I can document it through town records, but also up at the Fairview Cemetery, which I'm up there quite a bit, and I've done a lot of searching around up there. Some very large families came together right after 1890, and they arrived in Westfield together. There was, do you want me to name names?
Well, just one or two families perhaps, but just more give us a sense of the time frame when they came, and I'm also curious now when you say you've spent time at the cemetery, that was your business, but was Fairview...
Well, Fairview was always
there. Well, that's another little piece you can get back to.
So, well, the first children born to Italian families I can document was a Joseph Uccioli, and he was a cousin to who was born Raffaella Iovino, and they were born in 1894. And I can document that they were the first two Americans born of Italian descent, and they were followed by many, I have a count of about 15 born before 1920 that, in fact, no, I'm wrong. There are about 15 of them born before 1910. And that's only two families, two large families. I would say that in Westfield, by 1920, when my parents came, there were very many Italian Americans born here. I can't even, I don't have a record of exactly how many, but there were many of them born here.
Well, now, do you happen to know what their business or what their craftsmen, were they craftsmen also? Well, what would they have done?
Right. The very first ones that came here, I have tried to find out from their grandchildren and their children and their grandchildren, why did they come to Westfield? What was it? They didn't get off the train in Westfield. Why didn't they get off in Cranford? I mean, I don't know why the first one
Well, they came from the cities. They all would have been in the cities, and something
most
brought them here.
Most of them had stopped in New York. And I think that from what I can gather, there was something in the newspapers about employment in Garwood, because many factories were in Garwood. So I believe that that's the first ones first came here because of that. Or they came here because there was lumber companies.
Yes,
or
Tuttle Brothers.
They were looking for employees. So I think the first ones came, and like I said, the men came first. Once they saw that they could make a living here, they quickly got out of the city. I mean, that was just not for them.
So as probably from newspaper ads.
I would say that's what I understand, that the first ones came because of newspapers. Why they got off in Westfield rather than Garwood, I don't know. Or they got off in Garwood, and our community, the Italian-American community, is on the Garwood line, so they might have just started to spill over into the next town.
Because Westfield at that time would have had opportunities.
Yeah, and the first group of Italians that came, they did go to that neighborhood. The second group went up to Watterson Place, which is now Watterson. It was Spring Street, was now Watterson Place. But the first ones came, and also the majority of the very first Italians, I would say all of them, were 4 or 5, maybe 6 families, big families, that came from the greater Naples area. They came first. They were the first in Westfield. And then many more different Italians came from different parts of.
Well, did you say your region? I don't know if I heard your region where your grandparents
Oh,
were. What was your region from Italy?
My grandparents come from Abruzzi.
Abruzzi.
Right.
Which is near?
The east coast of Italy, rather slightly north and east of Rome.
Okay.
Okay, Rome and Naples is on the west coast.
Okay.
And but that's my favorite. But the majority of the first ones, or all of the first ones in Westfield, were Neapolitans.
So do you happen to know this other region you talk about, Watterson and Downer Street?
Yes.
Were they from a similar region? I happen to know my family was Sicilian.
I would say that these. I'm going by who owned the stores. There was a couple little stores there and some boarding houses and whatnot. I would say they too were Neapolitans, but they were quickly followed by other Italians, Sicilians and Abruzzis, and they were up in one end. That was up there by Watterson and onto, and also another thing.
So I turned it over, Jeanette, so you can finish on that point
Yeah.
you were making about the gardens and
Gardens, yeah. What I was saying is that up at the other end, up West Broad Street and Downer Street, up that way, there were quite a few Sicilians that lived there, people who came from Sicily, small villages in Sicily, not the big cities. And they were the gardeners, and many gardens were planted. The original gardens were planted and kept by Italians, and actual Italians, not Italian Americans, but Italians. And they were the Meninos and the Mazzas and the Casertas. There were quite a few big families up there that did an awful lot of, that's another group. She showed, Paula just showed
Yeah,
you the name. No, that's
we
a
were
different
discussing.
name.
Yeah. Okay.
And these people came later.
Okay.
But the original ones, like I said, once they came, the thing I feel about researching all of this, once they came to Westfield, they were here to stay. They weren't going to go anywhere else. And
they made their contributions. That's what we also want to see what it was like for them here. I mean, did they have places to socialize, and did they socialize? Did they stick in their own communities?
Actually, that triangle I'm talking about, Central Avenue South and Grove Street, there were at least 2 or 3 social clubs, always social clubs there, but they were frequented by men. The women did not socialize that way. But
Now,
the
where
men,
were those clubs now?
those clubs, like there was one on Central, or 2 on Central, and 1 on North Street.
And this would have just been for Italians.
Italians. And of course they would have, other people would come down, different men in town. There was a lot of card playing. This was a time when people were poor, and their socializing was a lot of card playing.
So we're talking what time now?
We're talking about any time after the turn of the century up to the World War II.
Okay.
Those clubs were always there.
Just to give us a time frame. Okay.
And a lot of socializing was done, strictly playing cards and some drinking. And all men,
not the women.
and there were many men who were not of Italian descent or Italians that would come down and play cards and socialize with the men.
Mm-hmm.
And those clubs, like I said, they were almost like what they had, the smoking clubs today where you go and have your cigars. Well, that was the type of thing that they did. And they played bocce naturally in the summer. And
well, not unusual that it would be for men only at this time.
at that time,
It wasn't
because
strictly-
women stayed home. That wasn't a thing.
That wasn't an ethnic-
Europeans. I don't think it was just Italians.
No, that wasn't.
I think it was a European thing. The woman stayed home, and the man,
Exactly.
he did the
Right.
socializing
Right.
for the family.
Right.
And any contacts that were made through the men. It was a time, like I said, we were here, and there was so much that they wanted for their children. They wanted them to be the American kids, and so even though they started as Italians getting together for the clubs, as I said in that article, learning from our families, the first ones that came, the younger generation, the first ones born in this country, they made their own club. They had their own activities going. And a lot of them, now, Italian Americans had a hard time. Something I think would be interesting. When they graduated high school and one or two went on to college at the very, very beginning, say the late 20s, early 30s.
You're talking Westfield High School now.
Yes, graduating.
And most of them, I would imagine, it would the Italians did not go on to high school.
No, no.
Was there even that many at that time, though?
No.
Most people, would
no.
you say, have a percentage?
A very small percentage
Small
went on to
percentage?
high school, and the few that
Went on
did,
to college, you mean?
yeah, very few. I think before World War II, maybe half a dozen of all the children went to college, but many of them went to high school.
You're not speaking just Italians now. You're
No.
speaking of the whole school.
I'm talking about Italian American.
Oh, only the Italians. The
No.
other proportion of children went on to college, you would say.
I would, yes. In Westfield, always produced a lot of college material, but Italian Americans, very few went on to college. Very few went to high school at the time.
They didn't all finish high school?
No,
Oh,
no,
okay.
absolutely not.
And that was the reason because they had
And
to
then
work with their family
Families,
business?
I think, yes, and I think it was that, and I also think it had a lot to do with, and I'm going to go back to Columbus School.
Because there wouldn't have been a law then. I mean,
No.
public education, I forgot
Yeah.
what time frame that
No,
came.
they all quit about 15, 16 years old.
Okay.
But I think one of the reasons a lot of more Italian Americans did not go on to high school is because of that poor, it wasn't a poor education. Columbus School had a lot to do with it. I can't explain it. A bigger percentage went on to high school that came out of Lincoln School, where I went to school, and other schools in Westfield, a few that went to, even to McKinley, went on to high school more than those that went to Columbus School.
Oh, that's
that is
interesting then.
not just a coincidence.
Okay. This is another factor you're saying,
Right.
another
And
point.
I think it had something to do with, too, that
But now, excuse me, would they have gone to another school, or you go from, at that point, there was no middle school? You went from elementary to high?
You went to junior high school, Roosevelt Junior High School.
So the kids from Columbus School did not go...
fare well.
Did they go to Roosevelt School?
Yes.
They went to middle
They did
school?
not fare well in school for many reasons. And one of the reasons, I think, was Columbus School. They were segregated there and went into a whole new atmosphere of mixing with other children, and they were not doing real well. And yet these same children who never went to high school became very well off, their own businesses. They ran their business, construction businesses, tailoring, all kinds of businesses they owned. And it wasn't that they didn't have the capability. They didn't have
Opportunity.
well, no, I don't think it's the word opportunity. They did not have the incentive or were encouraged to finish schools. And I know myself. I don't know if I should say this, but I'm going to say it. I graduated very close to the top of my class. No one, no teacher, no guidance counselor, no one ever encouraged me to go to college. They wanted me to take a commercial course because all the girls of Italian descent took a commercial course. I didn't want that. I took a mixed course of
College prep.
and general. And I don't remember one teacher ever encouraging me or a, like say, guidance counselor. And I don't think even the ones that were doing well in school were ever encouraged to go on to college, let alone go on to high school, from grammar school to junior high. Very few were encouraged, pushed to go ahead, you must go on. You're doing very well, go on to high school. I think that was lacking then. And I can understand why, because so many of the kids quit school and they went into work in factories and whatnot because they were kids. They were 15, 16 years old with no training at all.
Well, I think the families somehow, education wasn't important to the Italians.
Right.
You have to have also the encouragement from the
home.
family. I think
Absolutely.
It's a combination of things,
Combination
I
of
would
things,
think.
right. Yes, but I think that the mere fact that not too many children from Columbus School finished junior high school, not even finished junior high school, it was out of proportion to the rest of the town. So I think that says something there.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's something that could even possibly be further researched for
Yeah,
information or curiosity.
But as I say, even though they didn't finish high school,
They made a lot.
They did wonderfully
Beautiful
well.
things. And you've got some photographs here that
yeah.
I can see that have important stories
Right,
that you can also continue
right.
on.
I want to present these to the Historical Society. I have a picture here of a fully dressed man in 1920. It's called the Bellini Westfield Italian Band. And just looking at the picture of these boys and girls, all with instruments, I'm looking again, all boys
All
again.
boys, yes, all boys.
All boys. And they're standing in front of the old school that was on Elm Street that was taken down. I believe this is the Elm Street School. And it shows that in 1920, that we had a full band. I would say there's 30 people in that picture.
I'd say so, yes.
At least 30
Yes.
people in that band, fully dressed. So that
Beautiful
meant
picture.
we were really here. We were starting to take root culturally. Here, that picture there, I think that's wonderful.
It's a fine picture, and it states right on front the Bellini Italian Band. That's a very nice photograph.
And then we have this picture of the Columbus Society. All the men in this picture again. And well, there's a couple of women. I'm wrong.
Yeah,
and they used to put on plays down at Columbus School. So this is after Columbus School opened in 1925. So they were putting on plays, and these plays were in Italian because there still was many Italian-speaking people.
So they actually were in Italian.
In Italian,
oh,
yes. They did not speak English.
Uh-huh.
This was for the immigrant, not the children of immigrants. But of course, many children of the immigrants could understand and speak Italian. And many of them, this is another little thing.
But this was an opportunity
Yes.
for the Italian residents
Right.
to go and watch a performance of some kind.
Right.
That's really very
And
good.
these are the same, this same Columbus Society, as I say, had feasts in Westfield, and they had the feast down on where the grounds that are now was Columbus School. And I can remember going as a child there. They had them, and they had fireworks. This was done every year.
The fireworks, they had fireworks until about 19...
Right, and it was done always in October. Yeah.
Now, do you happen to know the length of this society, how long they did these plays, by just approximate
Well,
time
I
frame?
would think that they were all over by 1936, 37.
Okay.
Yeah, because again, then see, the original Italians were dying off, so the English language was more important, and so if they did anything, it was in English. It was no longer in Italian.
Now, in your personal family, I'm just curious, we're speaking about English, did your mother,
Well,
everyone know English?
And my father,
I personally can say my grandparents never learned
yeah,
English.
no, my father came here as a 5 or 6 year old, and my
So he
mother
had
was
mastered
13.
English.
So they both spoke English
English well,
perfectly.
okay.
But when they wanted to say something that they didn't want us to know, they would say it in Italian, but most of us could understand
Right,
it.
that's,
enough of it.
again,
Yeah.
I can share that same little anecdote.
This other picture here is a picture of the Methodist mission, and it shows approximately, I'd say, 25 or 30 children. The Methodist mission was on Prospect Street in the middle of what is now the parking lot there, opposite the old town hall. The Methodist mission, I think, might have been the original church or a school. I'm not sure. But they had this little church to encourage children of Italian descent to become Methodists. They were wonderful. There was a Mr. and Mrs. Johnson who were in this picture, who were just wonderful. They were so encouraging, and I don't as much encouraging them to become Methodists as just to become good Americans and good Christian Americans. And some of the children, some of the families they came from did become active in the Methodist Church. Was the Filicello family, and I believe the third person born in Westfield. I'm not sure, but I think she was the third or fourth American born of Italian descent. Her name was Mary. That family, and also very well known in this area was the Villa family, and they too became Methodists, and I'm sure through the work of this mission. And many Italian American children went there, if not to become Methodists, to have a place where they felt comfortable, friendly area, friendly atmosphere, and also at Christmas time and different holidays they would give out new shoes, new clothing. It was many of the children did not get home or could not afford to give these children. So they were very, very helpful during and before, from World War I to right through the Depression. They were very, very helpful to the Italian community.
So the more poor residents were the
Yes,
Italians and
yeah.
possibly the German people. There were certainly some poverty,
I'm
but
sure.
not.
Yeah.
And you also felt perhaps they weren't always embraced by the Catholic Church in town?
Absolutely. I didn't want to bring that up,
Well,
but that's
but
true.
at the time, we
yes,
just
I would
had-
say that, and it's not being saying anything bad, but it's the truth. The Irish Catholic was more welcome at the Catholic Church in those early years more than the Italian Catholic was. So they found a little home there over at the Methodist Church. And not all, but a lot of them.
But I
A lot of
think,
children.
Jeanette, as I think we've said, it also possibly reflects the time frame,
Yeah,
not
time frame,
necessarily
absolutely.
our town.
No,
I
the
think,
time
and I think
frame.
it's interesting to state these anecdotes because this is what other Italians were experiencing at the
Right,
same time,
right,
I believe.
Yeah, that's true. And, what else did you want me to
So I think that's really been interesting, and so you've kind of given us a background what it's been like for the Italians, and so you've talked a little bit before World War I. Do you have anything about during the war, things that were going on, and after, just to
The
finish this time frame?
World War I was way before my time, but I don't know too much about
The town
war.
or the
No,
door. I know
no,
you talked
war.
about you
All
had,
I
you
know
had
is-
a picture of soldiers that had come
Yeah,
back.
Well, this is different. Now,
This is after the
here-
World War II.
Now, the very first parade they had in World War II, after World War II, veterans. It wasn't too long after, so the veterans could all get in their uniform yet. And this picture is a group that had assembled together at the corner of Park Street and Central Avenue, and they together marched up in their uniforms uptown to the parade, and I believe it was Memorial Day parade. And they marched as a group, and they were from they intermingled with all the other veterans that came home. And on that parade, I can remember something very clear. We were standing over by the Rialto Theater, and my youngest brother, who was at that time about 14 years old, he was in a troop of Boy Scouts. From the back of the truck, the boys assembled what looked like a mountain, and all these little boys, 10 to 14 years old, were holding up a flag like Iwo Jima, and they held it all the way from the monument all the way up to the cemetery without moving. And we have pictures of that.
Wow,
and
that's
we also have a picture of my mother and father standing in the front of near the Rialto watching this parade. And I might bring this up. I'm sure the Historical Society knows this, that there's a little coffee shop at the corner of Prospect Street and North Avenue, and I can't remember the name of the family that had it. But they still have the many, many, many pictures of that era of 30s and 40s. It'd be something to go in and see. I'm sure somebody knows about it. And those pictures are on the wall of that little cafe. And one day my son, who's 45 now, and he went in to have a cup of coffee, and he was looking at all these pictures on the wall, and all of a sudden he said, "Hey, there's my grandma." And the owner of the place said, No, you have a different last name. That's Mrs. D." And he said, "No, I'm telling you, my mother is a D." He said, "That's my grandmother there."
Wow.
And it was my mother watching that Iwo Jima float go by.
Oh, isn't that?
Right,
And this
looking up-
is in the cafe that was
Right, yeah, it's still there, and I just, the name of the people that own it just...
parked and what street?
Worth. Worth. Is it Worth? I think it is the Worth.
By the train station there?
Yeah, right across from Charlie Brown.
Oh, by Charlie Brown.
Yeah, right across from
Oh,
Charlie Brown. One of
well,
there.
now it's Vivian's Kitchen.
Yeah, well, right there,
Yes,
in there.
oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
and they used to have an awful lot of pictures
It
on
was
the wall.
worse.
Yeah.
I spent
okay.
days there getting ice cream from
Yeah, right.
down the street from my uncle's shoe store.
Right.
Yes.
So that's my memory of the closing of the war.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, the end of World War II made big changes in Westfield as far as the Italian American community was concerned. At that time, before that, any Italian American that got married and was looking for a place to live, they dare not look anywhere except that triangle or the other section up on West Broad Street and Downer Street. That was the only section in town that we even would try to rent. We would never think of
Rent
renting.
or purchase now.
Purchase.
Either
rent or
purchase.
purchase outside of those two areas. We didn't even try because it was refused, or somehow we knew that wasn't going to be. But
This is after the war?
no,
Oh,
before the war.
Before the war.
But after World War II,
Okay.
immediately it all changed.
Oh,
It
okay.
all changed because they came home and they said, hey, this is not going to go on anymore. And
Okay.
it changed immediately. And of course, people were becoming, I always go back to say this, maybe we're time to close here.
Yeah, well, it's a good way to close, and
I'm
you
gonna
say
tell you
gave
again.
them opportunities,
Yeah.
and they did.
Right.
The education changed things,
Right.
and
I have to say it again and again. The greatest gift my parents left to their 9 children was not inheriting property nor money. It was the gift that they gave us to be born and raised. All the blocks that were put in front of us, we jumped over every one of them, and we became true Westfielders. And I love Westfield. I could cry when I think of it. My father would be so proud of the big family he had, and because he was very patriotic, took the advantages of Westfield and put it to good use, because the school system in Westfield was terrific. Even to those who did not finish school, the Westfield school system was the best, and always was, even back in the...
I thank you for contributing and leaving this with the Historical Society. Your father would be proud of that, having been one of the first families who did really start his own business. The Stephanus is an important family, and it should be part of the Westfield history, and we're very thankful that you've given us your time and left us with this information.
I'm glad to do it. And I will hand over these pictures. If in the future you want to know who are in these pictures and more about them, I will be glad to tell you more about them.
Okay, Jeanette, that's great. It's been very, very interesting. I thank you for your time.